My dog died. The red disk of the sun hung like a vast blazing sphere in the western sky. Its mellow rays, stripped of their midday heat, painted the glassy sea in a magnificent fabric of shimmering crimson and gold. The water was a mirror, and the turquoise sky, nearly half-shrouded in the tender purple of the gloaming, gazed down upon the waves with a quiet, gentle grace. Here and there the silhouettes of fishing boats darkened the water, while gulls perched upon the sun-warmed rocks along the shore. High on the hill, the clean, beautiful town began to veil itself in evening mist. The slender spires of its churches, its windows, and its greenery reflected the sinking sun, glowing and smoldering like molten gold. In a meadow by the road, a mower rattled. The refreshing scent of newly shorn hay mingled with the delicate, salt-damp breath of the sea. Slowly, imperceptibly, the sun sank into the depths. Its journey across the heavens had come to an end for the day. The warmth faded, the swelter of the afternoon gradually replaced by a still evening chill. A wide road wound along the coastline, lined with bus shelters and flanked by paths for cyclists and strollers. People wandered the shore, old and young, many with children in tow. Cyclists sped past with bravado. Rollerbladers glided by with a rhythmic whir. Laughter and light-hearted banter filled the air. A man sat on a bench at the bus stop. His circular gray beard and close-cropped silver hair signaled to the world that an old man sat there. But it was not the gray beard or the silvery head that caught the attention of those passing by. It was the large tears, glinting in the evening sun, that traced slow paths down the old man's cheeks. People arrived at the stop, cast a glance at him, shrugged, and crowded onto the arriving buses. The buses came and went, so did the people. At times the stop was a throng of humanity, at others it was a hollow void. The old man sat, unhurried, bound to nowhere. Occasionally he wiped the tears away with his palm, sighing to himself as he fixed his gaze back on the sun as it slipped behind the horizon. He wished that his dog, Rami, could have seen this sunset, just one last time, the companion with whom he had walked this beautiful shore so many times before. The rattle of scooters sounded from the pavement. Two young girls, perhaps 10 years old, one in a pink dress, the other in blue, pushed off hard with their feet, approaching the stop at speed. At the bench, they dragged their heels to a skillful halt. They stood still, eyeing the old man with curiosity, whispering to one another. Finally, the one in blue asked, "Why are you crying?" The old man raised his eyes, wiped them with his palm, and said, "My dog died."
"Was he a mean dog?"
the girl in pink asked. The old man smiled through his tears. "A very friendly dog. He loved to play with children."
"We aren't children anymore,"
the girl in blue stated. "But we like playing with dogs. We just don't have one." "I don't have one anymore either." "When you get a new dog, make sure he knows how to sit and lie down on command," the girl in pink advised. The girl in blue added, "Teach your dog to bark. Woof, woof, woof." The girls laughed at their own joke. A bus pulled up, and the girls hurried aboard. The old man did not resent their laughter. Thoughts of life, which is largely a deception and an illusion, thoughts of transience, of the inevitable end, of the darkness beyond the grave and the weight of eternity. All these lofty reflections are fitting and natural in old age. They are the harvest of long internal labor, the fruit of much suffering, and they form a deep spiritual wealth. But to a young mind just beginning its life, such thoughts are simply a misfortune. Yes, a misfortune, the old man repeated to himself. He sat alone, a solitary figure of sorrow. The sun had vanished beneath the skyline, the sea took on shades of gray, and only the western reaches of the sky remained a vivid rose, caught in the reflection of the departed sun. "Scoot over, old man," a harsh voice suddenly barked. "What are you sprawling here for like a dead dog?" The old man flinched as if a cold blade had been driven into his heart. atop his already aching soul. He edged toward the end of the bench and looked up. Two men of indeterminate age, overgrown with hair and dressed in filth, slumped down beside him. One of them jostled the old man roughly and set a 2-liter plastic bottle of beer down on the seat. Hardly had his backside touched the bench before he raised the bottle to his lips, drinking as if possessed by a terminal thirst. "Ah!" he belched with satisfaction, handing the bottle to his companion. The bottle passed back and forth. They drank with relish and obvious greed. Soon, one of the men rose, staggered behind the shelter, relieved himself against the plastic wall, and grunted like a hog. The stench of the drinkers and the rising odor of urine from behind the pavilion forced the old man to his feet. He took a few steps, as if in a dream, intending to cross the road.
"Hey, where do you think you're going? Out of the way, you devil!" came the shout from the bench.
"Watch where you're going, you damn geezer! Are you blind, you old cur?"
The old man stopped, turned his gaze toward the drunks lounging on the bench, and said softly,
My dog died.
"Ha! People die every goddamn day like mangy dogs, and he's whining about a dog." The other added with drunken bravado, "Well, that's certainly a reason to drink." He raised the bottle, drained it, and hurled it at the back of a passing cyclist. The rider glanced over his shoulder, hunched over his handlebars, and pedaled harder, disappearing into the distance. The old man remembered a meeting with a large dog a month ago when Rami was still alive. They had been walking together, slow and peaceful. Old Rami moved as if in a dream, only rarely sniffing beneath a bush or lifting a leg. Suddenly, barking erupted behind them, and a large, white dog appeared. In the past, Rami would have straightened his back, held his head high, and braced for a fight. But now, in his old age, he simply stood still, head bowed, motionless. The large, white dog looked in wonder at this inexplicably pathetic creature, then suddenly turned and ran on. Rami raised his head and looked at his master, his eyes full of shame and sadness. The old man leaned down, stroked the dog's head, ran his hand over his back, and said through his tears, "Rami, don't feel ashamed. Old age is no disgrace. We all grow old. We all lose our strength, our beauty, and our charm. You were once quite the fighter yourself, especially against your rivals. Your time is drawing to a close, Rami. The laws of nature apply to us all, and one must accept it, even if you cannot grasp what is happening with your little dog's mind." The old man sighed, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, and whispered, "Now you live in the heavens, Rami, somewhere near the stars, looking down at the earth. How can you bear being apart?" The old man began to walk along the pavement. He did not look back at the sea or the reddening west. A tremendous ache and sorrow weighed upon his soul, bringing heavy thoughts. What was the point of it all? Why the world and the yellow-red evening sky? Why the beautiful sunset? Rami could no longer see it. Yes, death is natural. Death belongs to the living world. But if it must be so, why is it so absolutely final? There should be a chance, some way to meet a loved one again, even for a moment, once a year. To stroke Rami's head, to scratch behind his ears, to hand him a slice of sausage, to walk with him for just another 100 meters. Why does a dog live so little compared to a man?
But is a dog's life really so short?
15 years is a long time. 15 years ago, no one called him a damn geezer. Whether dog or man, death settles everything. Death does not ask about your breed, your birthplace, or your pedigree. It cares nothing for masters, wealth, or poverty. It does not ask for nationality, citizenship, or residency permits. It does not care if you speak the state language at a B or C level, nor does it ask for a bank statement. Death simply says, "Come, it is time." Death, when it sees fit, takes the ancient patriarch and the tender beauty in the bloom of spring alike. Before death, all are equal. Everyone is given their time, though at the graveside one hears the cry, "He left us too soon." Who is there to blame? Who can be held to account? Death sets the time for departure, and its decision is final. It was time for Rami to go too. Again and again, the image of Rami's funeral on that sunny afternoon rose before the old man's eyes. They had found that beautiful little clearing a few hundred meters from the road long ago on their walks. Under a spreading spruce sat a large stone that Rami had claimed as his own. And now Rami was back in that place. It was a good place, a beautiful place. The old man's imagination could not fathom Rami in a dark grave, away from home, abandoned, helpless, and dead. He did not want Rami to lie in his grave in sorrowful solitude. The dog had been so social, so friendly to everyone who visited. The nearby road, the hum of tires, the chatter of cyclists and walkers, all of it would give Rami company and ease his loneliness. The old man dug the grave beside a large, flat boulder at the edge of the clearing. The soil was sandy. Not a single root hindered the digging. He lined the bottom of the grave with spruce boughs, then climbed down with a groan. He took Rami, wrapped carefully in a clean, colorful cloth, from the edge of the grave and held him in his arms like a sleeping child, laying him gently at the bottom. He turned back the cloth to check that the eyes were closed, tucked Rami's large, soft ears against his cheeks, and arranged his front paws as they always were when he slept, slightly curled toward his belly. Then he settled the tail comfortably by the legs. Now that everything was arranged with care, he could have covered him and filled the grave, but the old man could not leave him. There he was, looking as if he were merely sleeping after a long walk. So handsome, with his smooth, soft coat and the tiny white spot on the back of his neck. The old man sat on the edge of the grave, legs dangling over the side, and gazed mournfully at his dog. He could still stroke him now. He was still in this world. But soon, the world, the awakening of nature in spring, the sunlit summer mornings, the golden autumn, and the crisp winter days would no longer be for him. He would no longer track a scent, bark at a squirrel leaping through the branches, or find joy in the smells of the earth. The old man sat and wept. How many times had they walked the woods together? In every season, in every weather, always along the forest trails and roadsides. Now Rami was leaving this beautiful world behind, leaving his master forever. A sorrow, vast and boundless, surged in the old man's chest. It would ebb for a moment into the realm of bright memories, only to return and crush his heart even more heavily. The old man sat there, legs dangling, with Rami hushed into eternal sleep at his feet. A total silence reigned. It was late summer, and the birds had finished their singing and nesting. The old man spoke to himself as if comforting the dog. "Rami, spring will come, and you will hear the beautiful birdsong. You know that the songbirds love the mixed forest most of all." He raised his eyes and let them sweep over the clearing, as if judging one last time if Rami had been given a resting place to his liking. The midday sun shone through the treetops, bathing the clearing in a soft, tender light. In the shadier spots grew ferns. At the sunnier edge, cowberries glowed red among clusters of blueberry bushes. Grasshoppers leapt from the grass, flying for meters before vanishing into the green as if they had never been. The old man was struck by the variety of trees surrounding the clearing, as if they had gathered from the depths of the forest to enjoy the light. Or perhaps to say goodbye to Rami? Beneath the very spruce where the grave lay, dozens of different trees could be seen. Nearby grew a hazel, standing like a large, friendly shrub. On its branches near the top hung small clusters of nuts already turning brown. A flicker of pleasure crossed the old man's face. Soon the squirrels would be busy here, keeping Rami company with their antics. Near the hazels stood beeches with their smooth silver-gray bark. Among their foliage one could already spot the occasional yellow leaf, the first sign that autumn was not far off. These tall, spreading beeches, with their many thick branches, were laden with triangular nuts in prickly husks, a feast for the squirrels. A little further from the beeches was a small aspen grove. Their serrated leaves, held on long, slender stalks, hung motionless, as if mourning the dog at the bottom of the grave and pitying the old man on its edge. Then a light, barely perceptible breath of wind passed over the crowns, and the aspen leaves began to whisper among themselves like mourners in deep grief. For a moment the quivering of the leaves ceased, and total silence returned. Then the quiet whispering began anew. At a respectful distance from the aspens grew a few lindens with their small leaves. Tiny nut-like fruits were hidden among them. On the breeze came a strange, sickly sweet scent. Aphids were feeding on the leaves, secreting honeydew. The old man sighed. Rami would no longer know that scent, so pleasing to his nose. Standing apart in the sunlight were slender birches with their pale bark. Through their green leaves, shimmering in the wind, the bottomless blue of the sky was visible. Plenty of yellow had already appeared in the birch leaves, a first trial of the golden yellow robes they would wear in autumn. Away from the birches, in a shadier spot, right by the large stone where Rummy lay, spruces reached toward the sky. Long cones hung downward from their whorled branches. But on the other side of the stone, a rowan boasted its clusters of bright red berries. At the far edge of the clearing, blackbirds hopped. They turned their foolish beaks toward the old man, debating whether to be startled. Having decided they were, they flew one after another toward the birch tops with a merry chatter, as if mocking the old man who did not know how to fly. Suddenly, something thudded into the grave beside Rummy. Someone was busy in the spruce branches and had dropped a cone, a memento for the departed. The old man took the cone, turned it between his fingers, and placed it by Rummy's front paws. He sighed and moved with sudden resolve. He braced his feet in the bottom of the grave, stroked the dog's head one last time, and quickly covered him with the cloth. He placed a few light spruce branches over the cloth, plucked a few wildflowers from beside the grave, and set the small bouquet near the dog's nose. He climbed out quickly, seized the shovel, and began to throw sand into the grave. Occasionally, he wiped away tears with the back of his hand, shoveling steadily. He leveled the mound and replaced the sod exactly as it had been before. Soon, ferns would grow over the spot, and by next spring, the forest flowers would bloom. The old man was startled from his memories by cyclists and skaters whirring past. He turned his gaze to the strollers. He wanted to talk. Not to share his burden, but to speak of Rami, to let everyone know what a good dog he had been. Of course, Rami had been quite the trickster, especially when he was young. But then, we've all been young once. The old man's eyes wandered restlessly and painfully through the crowd moving along the shore. Is there truly not one person among these dozens who would want to listen? But all these happy, carefree people moved on without stopping, never noticing the old man or his grief. He quickened his pace as if to flee from the sorrow, to leave it behind. But the sorrow nested in his chest, squeezing, pressing, refusing to drop back for even a moment. On the bridge over a small, fast-flowing stream, the old man stopped. He leaned against the railing and watched the water, mesmerized. The water flowed, who knew where or why. It flowed yesterday, it flows today, tomorrow, and the day after. Then it evaporates, becomes rain, and perhaps this very same water will flow under the bridge before the observer's eyes once again. It is the cycle of nature. But why couldn't Rami, a tiny part of nature himself, make his own cycle and appear again, young and fresh, before his master's eyes? wagging his tail, barking playfully, calling him to play. The old man sighed and walked on. He crossed the bridge. Before the crossroads, a sign on a small 2-story building announced, "Pub." He went inside and ordered a mug of beer and a shot of vodka. He settled into a free spot at a corner table. Opposite him sat a young man and woman, side by side, with cocktail glasses and straws before them. The young man held the girl's hands in his, and she looked at him with adoring eyes. Occasionally, they whispered words whose meaning only they knew. The old man drained the vodka and chased it with the beer. It felt as if his heart grew a little lighter. He went back to the counter and held out the glass. "Be a dear, pour another 40 grams," he added, as if to justify himself, or perhaps attempting a joke. "In this heat, the vodka evaporates from the body faster." The stout, middle-aged barmaid, wanting to crack a joke in return, said, "The main thing is that your heart doesn't stop." The old man, sensing the hint at his age, replied with irony in his voice, "From this 100 grams, or from anything else you're thinking of, my heart isn't going to stop just yet." He sat back at the table, drained the second shot, and stared motionlessly at his beer mug. His thoughts drifted back to Rami. Yes, Rami knew how to live and how to die. He had come down the 3 flights of stairs with difficulty, but on his own feet. He walked across the asphalt in front of the house to the weeping birch, sat down, and then fell face forward onto the grass. His heart had stopped. And some bird, some mischievous bird, chirped in the birch branches above Rami's body, so clear and resonant, as if playing a flute. The little bird likely thought the dog was sleeping and wanted to wake the sleepyhead, for the sun was already high. But the old man sat on the grass by Rami's body and cried. Cried as heart-wrenchingly and piteously as he had never cried in his life. He and Rami had been side by side every single day. Every morning upon waking, Rami would walk quietly to the old man's bed, rest his head on the quilt, and be glad that a new day had arrived. The old man rested his head on his hands and sighed heavily. "Do you have a toothache?" the young man sitting opposite him asked compassionately. "My dog died." The old man's eyes filled with tears and his voice wavered. He turned his face away and began to look out the window. Silence fell.
Did he get sick?
The girl sitting beside the young man asked with interest. "No, from old age." The old man wiped a tear with his sleeve and took a sip of beer, then clarified. "Old age is not a disease. Buy a new dog. It eases the loss and gives you company," the girl said. She looked at the young man and added, "To be left alone is very sad. You feel lonely and abandoned." The old man nodded, took a sip of beer, and said regretfully, "I would, but a proper puppy is expensive. You can't buy a dog on a pension." The girl leaned to the young man's ear and whispered something. The young man nodded and stepped out. The girl picked up her glass, stirred it with the straw, and began to sip her cocktail, watching the old man with a mysterious expression. The young man was gone a long time. When he returned, he was holding a small brown and white puppy in his arms. "Here, take this little scrap of a dog. He'll grow, though." The young man placed the puppy on the table. It whined piteously and sniffed around the tabletop. At first, the old man seemed startled by the unexpectedness of it. Then he placed his hand at the edge of the table in front of the puppy's nose so it wouldn't tumble off. He stroked the puppy's head with tenderness, and only then did he remember to say thank you. "The best thanks is to be a good master to the puppy," the young man said. "We have a whole litter of them." "I am a good master. This puppy, this dog, will have a good life with me." The old man was in quite a daze. He thanked them again, and forgetting to finish his beer, he tucked the puppy under his arm and hurried toward the exit, as if fearing the young man might change his mind and take the puppy back. He left the pub and headed toward the river to cool down and calm himself near the water. On the shore of the estuary, open to the sea, grew tough, gnarled pines, bent by the coastal winds. The old man sat down and rested his back against a pine trunk. The sun set. Twilight descended upon the land. As if the grass did not notice its own age in the darkness, it erupted into such a cheerful, youthful chirping as never occurs on a hot summer day. A whirring, a peeping, a scuttling, tenors and sopranos and mysterious bass notes. All of it blended into an incessant, monotonous hum, and to this accompaniment the old man drifted into memories and longings for Rami.
But the puppy climbed about with a serious expression at his feet, busily exploring. It investigated the surroundings with focus, sniffing every blade of grass and pine needle it encountered. It climbed into the old man's lap, licked his hands, and hurried down again, for its curiosity was great, and the world was even greater. But it did not go far from the old man. It returned again and again, and by the old man's boot it lifted a leg and marked it as its own. A surge of tenderness rose in the old man's soul for this tiny creature, a creature faithful and loving toward man, yet, at the same time, a heavy shadow of sorrow struck his heart again and again. Once more, Rami appeared before his eyes, his trusting yet mischievous and playful gaze. If only he could stroke Rami one more time. But the puppy kept on working. It sniffed the old man's pockets, tugged at a pocket flap with its teeth, growling threateningly all the while. It licked the old man's hand in passing and, lifting a leg, marked his other boot as well. Feelings of tenderness and grief surged in the old man's soul like waves at sea. And just as the storm-tossed surges crashing against the shore quiet one another as they recoil, so the feelings of tenderness for the puppy softened and stilled his grief. Balance and peace slowly gathered in the old man's soul. A new life, joyful, carefree, and trusting, was busy at his feet.